Welcome to episode 10 of the Switch 2 Backwards Compatibility Performance Series, and for this milestone, we're doing something a little bit different. After a wave of requests, we're diving into some trilogies, starting with one of the most requested in the Batman Arkham series. This time I'm including side-by-side footage as requested, comparing Switch 1 and Switch 2. It's something that so many of people asked for, and I won't lie, it does take about 4 times longer to put these videos together, but it's a really valuable learning experience. If there's anything I can tweak or improve, I would love your feedback as always. So, grab your cape, sharpen your bangarang, and follow me into the shadows, or at least the backwards compatibility gameplay. I'm not the hero the algorithm deserves, but I'm definitely the Dork Knight. Batman Arkham Asylum. The Arkham trilogy was a heavy hitter on any platform, and fans were especially curious to see how the first entry would perform on the Switch 2. While it's a dark, atmospheric game with tight corridors and heavy detail, it was also known for showing its technical limitations on the original Switch. This trilogy episode focuses on the side-by-side comparisons, and this one really sets the tone. On the original Switch, Arkham Asylum hovers around the 30 FPS mark, dropping down to around 22 frames per second at time. During my initial review back in December 2023, there was also plenty of stutter that occurred during the open sections of the story mode. Challenge mode tend to hold up better, but their level of detail pop-in is noticeable, particularly when entering new rooms or large areas, and some asset details load fairly late. On the Switch 2, load times are drastically improved. I'd estimate about a 70% reduction in load time. Frame rate holds consistently at 30 FPS even in areas where the Switch 1 version struggled. Level of detail pop-in is still present, but assets do render far more quickly and consistently, making the transitions less jarring. While it might not be a huge visual overhaul, it's definitely a more stable and fluid experience. It's a strong start to this trilogy revisit. Even though it's not a full remaster, the reduced load times and smoother consistency make a big difference, especially in story mode. Batman Arkham City. Arkham City is often seen as the crown jewel of this trilogy, expanding the world, deepening the story, and pushing the hardware harder than ever with its open world Gotham. On Switch 1 it already performed better than expected, so fans were curious to see whether Switch 2 could take that solid foundation and push it further. Out of the 3 Arkham games, Arkham City felt the most stable on the original Switch. The frame rate held fairly steady with only minor stutter when gliding or running around the open world. It wasn't flawless, but it was very playable and a strong portable version of the game. On the Switch 2, the experience is significantly smoother. Load times again are drastically reduced by roughly about 70%, and the stutter that occasionally cropped up while traversing Gotham is virtually gone. The frame rate is more consistent and the world feels snappier to explore. It's still capped at 30 FPS, but it holds that target much more reliably. It's a very solid jump in consistency and responsiveness. Arkham City was already impressive on the Switch 1, but it becomes more like a definitive handheld version. Smooth, sharp, and even more enjoyable to explore. Batman Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight had high expectations as the conclusion of Rocksteady's trilogy, but on Switch 1, it was one of the most infamous ports in recent memory. People wanted to know if the Switch 2 could redeem it, or if the Batmobile was still driving straight off that performance cliff. On the Switch 1, frankly, it was virtually unplayable. The game struggled hard to maintain even 15 FPS during car sequences, and the core experience, even on foot, was marred by low responsiveness and heavy stutter. It remains one of the first bad reviews I ever had to write, and it was genuinely disappointing to see such a landmark game handled so poorly. On the Switch 2, the frame rate has definitely improved, but it still can't reach 30 FPS. Visuals remain extremely pixelated. This isn't because of dynamic resolution, the game was just locked at a much lower screen resolution. And despite some gains in consistency, Arkham Knight continues to feel rough. During testing, the game still crashed to the home screen, which really says it all. I think someone must have been channeling the Joker when they greenlit this version, and it's a frustrating reminder of how Not every port gets a second chance. It's a missed opportunity, again. And while technically better than the original release, it's still far from what this game deserves. A disappointment on Switch 1, and sadly, still rough as guts on Switch 2. On to the Sniper Elite series. Sniper Elite V2 Remastered. As the first of the Sniper Elite titles brought to Switch, V2 Remastered set the tone with its stealth action and infamous slow-mo kill cams, but it was the least technically refined of the bunch. People were curious to see if the Switch 2 could clean up the pixelated visuals and tighten up the performance to bring it closer in line with the much stronger sequels. On the Switch 1, the game delivered a fairly smooth 30 FPS, but it came with a scaled down pixelated look that made long distance shots less satisfying than what they should be. While it was still functional and mostly consistent, it didn't look especially sharp and definitely lagged behind the better optimized later entries in the series. On the Switch 2, the upgrade is modest but noticeable. Load times are significantly faster and the overall resolution is slightly crispier, making environments and enemies more legible at long distance. That said, it's not a dramatic overhaul, just a more stable and slightly cleaner version of what was already a decent port. It's not a standout improvement, but a more comfortable way to play the game that always felt just a little bit held back. If you skipped V2 originally, this is a better entry point now, just don't expect a dramatic transformation. Sniper Elite 3. Sniper Elite 3 marked a huge leap forward for the series, offering much larger levels, better stealth mechanics, and more refined visuals. Unlike V2, this one was actually praised on the Switch 1 for being a properly optimized port, so people were curious to see just how much the Switch 2 could squeeze out of an already solid game. On the Switch 1, it was already a great experience. It ran close to 30 FPS with sharp enough visuals and responsive controls that made it easy to recommend. It didn't suffer from the resolution woes of its predecessor and maintained a solid performance throughout. On Switch 2, the performance remains consistently locked at 30 FPS, load times are noticeably faster, although to be fair, they were already fairly reasonable on the Switch 1. The most notable improvement is a smoother, clearer resolution. The image quality is just a little bit tighter, especially when scoped in or tracking enemies at a distance. It's a strong port made slightly stronger, and if you enjoyed it the first time, you'll love how it plays here. And for new players, it's a great place to jump into the series. Sniper Elite 4. Sniper Elite 4 pushed the scope even further with bigger maps, more verticality, and a lot more detail. It was already one of the best ports on Switch 1, but people wanted to know if it could go even better, especially in the denser environments. On the Switch 1, it was already a well-optimized experience. Sniper Elite 4 ran at around 24 to 30 FPS with decent image quality. Some level of detail pop-in was noticeable when scoping across large distances or exploring intricately detailed areas, but it didn't really impact gameplay significantly, and it was one of the best shooters on the system, full stop. I decided on the Switch 2 to try a more demanding level this time around, and the results were still strong. The game runs smoothly around 30 FPS with no noticeable dips or hitches, even though the frame counter does show at times that there is. There's still the level of detail pop in, but it's slightly faster, even though it's still present. The locked frame rate is a welcome addition, and here's hoping that we'll see Sniper Elite 5 or Sniper Elite Resistance come to the Switch 2. Rebellion, if you're watching, make it happen. It's not a major upgrade, but it doesn't really need one. Sniper Elite 4 remains one of the best shooters on the Switch, and the Switch 2 continues to deliver that experience at its best. And finally, we have the Xenoblade Chronicles Trilogy. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. The Definitive Edition of Xenoblade Chronicles was a major remaster of a Wii classic, and while the Switch port was well received, the dynamic resolution led to noticeable pixelation, especially in handheld mode. People were keen to see if the sharper Switch 2 display and extra power would give this RPG the polish it deserved. On the Switch 1, the version ran at a consistent 30 FPS and was one of the more stable RPGs on the platform. That said, it did have a very soft image at time, with handheld resolution dropping significantly in some areas. The pixelation didn't ruin the game, though it was noticeable, especially in complex environments or large battles. On the Switch 2, the frame rate remains a solid 30 FPS, but the visual clarity is improved, because the dynamic resolution doesn't need to adjust. There's still some softness in some places, but it feels less distracting now. Load times are also significantly faster, making it a smoother experience overall. Again, not a real dramatic overhaul, but a definite improvement. It still remains the best way to play the original Xenoblade on a handheld, and now it feels a bit closer to what the remaster always aimed for.
So, shall we?
Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Xenoblade 2 pushed the Switch hardware more than most RPGs, with huge open areas, flashy effects, and complex systems. It was notorious for its resolution drops, especially in handheld mode, so this was high on people's requests to revisit on the Switch 2. On the Switch 1, the performance is solid overall with a locked 30 FPS, but the visuals take a hit in handheld mode. The resolution could dip low enough to make the text and characters a bit hard to read. Dock mode fared better, but it still looks soft compared to other big RPGs. Again, on the Switch 2, the game holds a consistent 30 FPS, even in large open zones with lots of enemies. The resolution stays sharper and the visual presentation benefits from an upgraded display. While not a complete visual overhaul, the game looks cleaner and plays as smoothly as ever. The performance was always strong, but now it looks strong too. This version finally matches the ambition of the world it's presenting, and it's a great time to return if you've been waiting for a crisper version. Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Xenoblade 3 was one of the most technically impressive RPGs on the Switch, and it pushed huge environments with smooth combat while maintaining strong performance. Still, people were asking if we could check it out on the Switch 2 to see if it could push that experience to the next level. On the Switch 1, it held a stable 30 FPS most of the time, even during intense battles. There were occasional dips during large-scale fights or crowded areas, but nothing game-breaking. Visuals are solid, but there was still room for improvement in clarity and load times. On the Switch 2, the frame rate stays locked at 30 FPS, and any stutters or dips seem to be gone. The image looks sharper and the load times are quicker. Again, not a massive leap, but just everything runs smoother and makes it even easier to stay immersed in the world. This was already a very polished RPG, and now it's just a little bit better. If you've held off on wanting a reason to jump back in, Switch 2 delivers the definitive version of one of the best JRPGs of the system. And there you have it, a trilogy of trilogies tested back to back on the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. Whether it's Batman's brooding better load times, Sniper Elite delivering clean headshots at a smoother frame rate, or Xenoblade's sprawling worlds looking just a little bit sharper, it's clear that some of the best series on Switch 1 are even better with the added power of Switch 2. Not you, Arkham Knight. Not every upgrade is massive, but across the board, most of these games feel stable, more consistent, and in many cases, more enjoyable to revisit. Not you, Batman Arkham Knight. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and we're going to return back to the usual format for a bit. We'll still do the side-by-sides if you prefer it this way, and as always, I thank you for watching and supporting the series and giving that valuable feedback. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you liked it, the best way you can support What's It Like is by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends. For more reviews, click on the thumbnails to the right, and for everything Nintendo, check out whatsitlike.com.au.